We have got a real treat for you today. We are in the home of Jim and Marie Gardner. Thank you for letting us come here today. And we are going to talk about the history of Rocky Mount through their eyes. These individuals have meant so much to our community. Jim, you and I have been going down memory lane, and Marie a little bit before starting, but we want you to teach us kind of what you've learned about Rocky Mount, what you've seen about Rocky Mount, and of course your influence as a couple has gone nationally. You still, within recent years as Commissioner of ABC Commissioner, have had influence that I have to say the video Talk It Out is in California. I told my son to play it for his son and talk it out with him. But y'all, from starting both being born here, growing up here, Belk Tyler, we've got great history from downtown from you and your family, Marie. But let's start with Jim, your father, Sheenie Gardner, and Mother Sue. Talk about some of your earliest memories.
Well, first of all, I tell my children all the time how lucky we were. We grew up in the best of times. Rocky Mount was a great place to grow up. I had wonderful parents and my two brothers. We grew up on Western Avenue, and I have such wonderful memories of Rocky Mount back in those days. And then as I got older and started in business, first with my dad in Gardner's Dairy Products, and then with Hardee's, and then with Gardner's Barbecue, there's just no other place that I would want to live other than Rocky Mount. And through politics and some other things, we've had chances to move elsewhere, but this is home for both Marie and I, and we were really fortunate that all three of our children married and lived here and raised their children up until they were grown. So we had a chance to visit them more than they wanted to see us, I'm sure. But just Rocky Mount's just a special place. And when I think back on the leadership in Rocky Mount that built this town, I've often said two of the smartest people I ever knew were my father and Marie's dad, Arthur Tyler. Both of them grew up in the Depression, started their businesses right in the middle of the Depression, and both were successful, gave back to the community so often. And I think Rocky Mount was just built on that type of, we're lucky to be here. We want to take advantage of it. And I hope that all the young people who maybe will see this will understand how lucky they are today. Marie and I were just in Charlotte visiting our granddaughter up there. You couldn't pay me to live in Charlotte. I mean, the traffic is bumper to bumper, too many people, you don't know anybody. In Rocky Mount, it's different. So we're very fortunate.
And I didn't realize both your parents were part of the entrepreneurial spirit.
Exactly.
Because that's so much with banking capital. And I mean, we just, in the early days, we were a hot spot. I mean,
people don't realize we had two major banks, People and Planners. Both of Marie's dad and my dad were on the executive committee at Planners. I'll tell you a very quick story. When we started Hardee's, the first Hardee's here, we had to borrow $10,000. And we went down to Planners at that time, and Leonard Rawls and myself, and they said, you know, we're not familiar with what a 15-cent hamburger is, but we'll lend you the money if your father comes down and endorses it. So we said, no way. We were very young and independent. We walked right across the railroad to People's Bank. Bill Stanley said, sure, I'll lend you the money. So I was with People's Bank, even though my father and Marie's dad were both with Planners. But Rocky Mount, back in those days, we had tobacco, we had textiles. We were still a railroad town at that particular time. Two major banks. We had Hardee's starting here. And most people don't realize for the first 2 or 3 years of Hardee's, every single person who worked for Hardee's was from Rocky Mount.
Great.
Every person. And we grew quite rapidly. We didn't have to bring anybody in from New York or Chicago, anywhere. Rocky Mount people did the job. So it's a special place.
Marie, Belk Tyler, was that already in existence when you were a little girl? I mean, did you grow up with your...
I grew up with Belk Tyler's, which was sort of the mecca of shopping. Everybody would go. It was department store with cosmetics, up clothing, even furniture. So everybody went to Belk's to buy everything they needed. So yes, I did, and it was real funny. Daddy always thought everyone should shop in Rocky Mount. So every now and then, Mother and I would sneak out of town and go to Raleigh and get something a little bit special and out of the ordinary. But yeah, I grew up with Belk's. Belk Tyler's being the store to shop in.
And when I moved here in the 80s, I remember going in the building and it still had the elevators with the gate that you pulled across. And there was somebody even running the elevator
Oh yeah, yeah.
for us. And it was 3 stories. Is that how tall it
3
was?
stories,
And there were 15 Belt Tylers in eastern North Carolina.
There were.
Yeah. Yeah, all of them headquartered. Mr. Tyler's office, of course, was here, right beside Belt Tyler's downtown. And then there were 15 stores, other stores in eastern North Carolina.
And they all spun off of his starting the first Bell Tyler?
There's a great story about Mr. Tyler. The store downtown at that time was called the Anchor Store. And the story goes, so I've heard, that Mr. Belk was on the railroad going to Florida. And they stopped in Rocky Mount for about 30 minutes late at night, like 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock at night. Mr. Belk got out to walk around and stretch, and he naturally walked over to the department store. And there was a young man in the window at 1 o'clock at night dressing the window and putting it up. And when Mr. Belk got to Florida, he called back the next day to the store. He knew the person who apparently owned it and said, "I'd like the name of the young man that I saw last night at 1 o'clock at night in there dressing the store." And they said, "Well, that was Arthur Tyler, who at that
wow.
time was 20 years old." And Mr. Belk said he just made a mental note, "I want to get him in my organization." He did, and then of course, 16 Belt Tyler stores later, he was still with them.
Mr. Belk and Mr. J.C. Penney were good friends. And Mr. Belk would periodically come and spend the night with us, and he had a driver, and he chewed tobacco. I'll never forget it. And he would sit in the back seat, and he had a big brass spittoon, I guess you call it, in the back seat, and which I thought was just, I couldn't understand that.
Not
But
attractive.
anyway, he always gave me a dollar bill.
Uh-huh.
And so I look forward to seeing Mr. Belk every time he came.
And back then, I mean, that was a big deal, giving you a dollar bill.
That was a lot of money, yeah, real special. Yeah.
Well, you all both grew up here, born
We did,
here, went to
yeah.
public school here.
Yep.
When did you realize that this was the prettiest girl you'd ever seen and you needed to start dating her?
I had actually gone off to prep school for 2 years, to Georgetown Prep in Washington, and I decided I wanted to come back my senior year and graduate in Rocky Mount. And I came back, and Maria and I had grown up 5 blocks
Didn't know
from each other.
really,
I was
but-
2 years older, so we, 2 years when you're in high school makes a lot of difference. But I saw her and I called her up and said, I'm Jimmy Gardner, and I'd love to go out. And she said, "I'm sorry, I'm busy."
Oh,
Well,
good for you.
Well, that happened 3 times, and finally I thought, she finally said, "My golly, he's going to keep calling." So I kept calling, and that was my 64 years ago. We've been married this October 62 years, and went together for 2 or 3 years, and so been a long time. But
And 3 children?
3 children,
Chris and Terry and
Beth. All 3 live in Rocky Mount.
Wonderful.
And
Thank
they-
you for that.
Yep.
Well,
They each have
nice to
3
have 'em
children. So we had 9 grandchildren, and we're so fortunate that at Christmas we could visit each house, as opposed now Beth's going to have to drive to Charlotte. And we were lucky, very lucky.
But Beth, I mean, she recently built a house in Rocky Mount and
She
lives
did.
close to her sister, and Chris and,
Yep.
and Stephanie have lived here, and it's just wonderful that they're here. And you've even got a couple grandchildren moving back now?
We have
Great-grandchildren.
well, we have a grandson who's moved
Grandson,
back.
excuse me, okay.
Yeah, and then we do have
Will.
2 great grandchildren now, who unfortunately live in Charlotte
Yeah.
and not here. And she married a Charlotte boy, so they'll be in Charlotte. She'll never come back here.
We're not worried about y'all moving to Charlotte.
No,
to be
I don't
close
think
to
so.
that. No, it ain't gonna happen. Well, granddaughters, I know you want to talk a little bit about a lot of people. A lot of us just were so sad at the loss of Tyler.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about her personality. She was a really generous, giving young lady, wasn't she?
It gets kind of emotional.
Okay. Was she? I know she worked with special needs kids.
She
did.
And
Tyler was a
she
special child. She graduated from Carolina. She went out to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. She loved to ski and became an expert skier. Wanted to become a ski instructor.
Oh.
And she was a mountain climber, unfortunately. She was a hiker. She was a marathon runner. And she worked for the state of Wyoming at a ranch for special need children. And she loved what she did. And she loved Wyoming and Jackson Hole. And Maria and I have often talked, I think she would have spent the rest of her life there. Her young friends out there, if you really were somebody who loved it, they called you a lifer. And Tyler was going to be a lifer, I'm sure. But she was a special young lady.
Well, and we want to show a cap that she knit. She would make them for her little students or her little children.
One Christmas she made, well, at one point she was a receptionist at a resort, and it was very boring for her because she just sat at the desk. And so she started knitting, taught herself how to knit, so she would sit there and knit when she wasn't busy. So one Christmas she decided she and her good friend, who also was killed with her, had 10 little boys, I think, in their cabin. And they decided, Tyler decided to knit caps for them. And so she personalized each cap. One was like Batman, so she had the Batman. And these little boys were thrilled to death to get these caps. So.
And these were little boys who didn't have homes. I mean, they just lived there.
And some of them weren't little. I mean, at one time, Tyler was actually knocked out by a young boy hit her.
Wow.
I mean, it was tough going. But she persevered, and she loved doing what she did. And she particularly loved it with the younger boys. These little boys, I guess, were 8, 10. And we actually went out and saw her run in a 26-mile marathon in Jackson Hole. And
thin air and everything.
Air and up and down. There were, I forgot how many women, 100 and some running in it, and she finished 10th in overall, first in her age group.
Wow, good.
Yeah, so anything she put her mind that she was going to do, she did. But we have 8 other great grandchildren.
Good.
Blair, who we just visited, is a PA in Charlotte, and she has 2 little boys now, 13 months apart. So she's going to have her hands full. And Marie and Allie and Josie also live in Charlotte. And then our one grandson, Gardner, lives in Wilmington. Will Noble has just moved back to Rocky Mount. And Carson Gardner lives up in Charlotte, in Raleigh, and works in Raleigh. So they're spread out everywhere now.
But not too far.
Not too far, no.
Fairly close. Well, good.
Yeah.
Well, I want to move into your interesting career. You were working with your dad in the dairy business. How did he react when you announced that you thought you might throw your hat in the ring for politics?
Well, first of all, he thought I had lost my mind when I told him I was going into the hamburger business.
Oh, okay.
I was working for my dad, and my good friend Leonard Rawls called me one day, and Leonard was a CPA and was living in Little Washington and was doing my pitiful tax returns. And he said, "You need to come with me. I've seen something in Greenville, North Carolina that you will not believe." And I said, "What is it?" He said, "It's a hamburger place, 15-cent hamburgers called Hardee's." And he said, they're lined up 30 and 40 at each window. And my first reaction was, do they sell milkshakes? And he said, yes, they do. Well, back in those days, you sold dairy mix to make the milkshakes, and we were selling dairy mix. So I got in the car, met Leonard over there. I'll never forget, as we drove up, he was right. There were at least 30 young people from East Carolina in each line. And back then, there were no seats. You walked up to the window, you got your hamburgers, and you left. That night, this was probably about 5 o'clock. We left about 2 o'clock that night. We had met with Wilbur Hardy, who was the owner, decided that we would open one in Rocky Mount. We would go in business. Leonard and I would own half of it. He would own half of it. And I came back and told my dad the next day I was going in the hamburger business, and he said, I hope you haven't lost your mind. Do you know what you're doing? And he would ask me almost every day, how many hamburgers do you think you're going to sell each day? And I'd say, Dad, you know, and he'd say, well, that's everybody in Nash County. You're not going to sell that many. The day we opened down on Church Street, there were cars lined up on Church Street to get in there. And about 4 o'clock, somebody said, have you seen your dad? And I said, no. He said, well, he's out directing traffic on Church Street, getting them in and out of it. And it just took off.
Oh, yeah.
Another funny story is about 5 blocks away at a filling station was Mayo Body, pumping gas in cars. And he said, all day long, all I could smell was this hamburger smell. And he said, I didn't think either one of you or Leonard had ever worked in your life, so I didn't go over there. He said, about the 3rd day I went over, and he said they were lined up and everything, and I think they have 300 and some Hardee's today. And wonderful success story in Rocky Mount.
How long did you work with Hardee's?
This was in 61 that we started Hardee's, and I left Hardee's in 67 officially.
Speaking of your dad, I like your dad's stories. They're pretty great. When you told him you were going to register as a Republican,
he said, "Have you lost your mind again?"
Yeah.
Yeah, and
but,
he was
it worked
probably
out
right.
for you. But I mean, everybody at that time was a Democrat. Everybody.
Everybody. Yeah, there were, I think, 400 registered Republicans in Nash County. It was just, I went to a JC meeting in Kinston with a group with other people, and Barry Goldwater was speaker. And everything he said that night, I agreed with. And we came back and we said, you know, we need to do something. We need to make a change around here. There's not a Republican Party. You don't have an opportunity for choice. It's just whoever's running, that's it. Mr. Cooley had been in Congress 31 years, and I was 29 years old. He'd been in Congress longer than I'd been born. And I don't know, we just kept saying we need to do something, and we decided to form a party, and I was elected chairman of the Nash County Republican Party. And then we said we need to give him some opposition, and lo and behold, I don't know why, I think Marie thought I'd lost my mind too.
I was going to swing over and say, okay, so now you had children at that point, right?
We did.
Yeah.
All 3 of them, were they born?
2 of them,
Two
the
of them
first
at
time.
that point, because you were 22 when y'all got married.
Yeah.
So this was a bold step. Was campaigning your thing, or you kind of?
No, it was not. Not at all. But I ended up having to, do a certain amount of it. But never dreamed he'd ever win. And
Well, now, wait a minute. You should have known immediately that with his charm and his intellect. And,
She thought I'd lost my mind too.
well, at 29 to go against an icon
Yeah.
like that. I mean, somebody who'd been there
The
so
election
long.
night, the second time when I defeated Harold Cooley, we were at the Velvet Cloak Inn in Raleigh, and after all the celebration,
And I was pregnant.
And you were
then
pregnant
my
with
third,
Chris, yeah.
my third child.
and we go to the room about 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, knowing we'd won. And I'll never forget, Marie sits on the bed and said, what are we going to do now? And I
Because you
said-
won.
I said, we're going to Washington. She said, no, you're going to Washington. I'm not carrying 3 children up to Washington. So I basically commuted. Most people don't realize the first time I ran, and this is my first taste of real politics in North Carolina, I got 48% of the vote against Mr. Cooley. The legislature, within 2 months, took every county I carried and took it out of the district, redid the district, so that the next time I ran, instead of having Davidson County, which was a Republican county, in my district, they gave me Orange County, which they said, that'll take care of him.
Chapel Hill.
Chapel Hill.
Yeah.
I carried Orange County. It was the only time I ever carried it, but I carried it. So when I got elected, 3 months later, they gerrymandered me again. They took Nash County out, put in with L.H. Fountain in the 2nd district. It had been in the 4th district. So they basically eliminated me from running. I couldn't beat L.H. Fountain, who was a conservative Democrat. So I got a real taste of dealing with the Democrat legislature. Now, when I hear them complaining about Republicans and gerrymandering and everything, I think you should have been around when I was coming along.
Always did it. I mean,
Always
it was
did
just,
it. Yeah.
it was
Just
just
changed
normal.
it every single time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Well, what stands out to you with your time in Congress?
how little I was able to contribute. The Democrats were overwhelmingly in charge, and I was on the Education and Labor Committee, and you just basically went to the meetings and sat there, and you couldn't contribute anything or do anything. Mr. Cooley had been in Congress 31 years. He didn't even have an office in the district. He had his law office in Nashville, and if you wanted to see him, you came over to Nashville to his law office. We had decided that we were going to really try to reach out to the people. So we opened a congressional office in every county. We had one in Nash, we had one in Wake, we had one in Chatham, we had one in Randolph, we had one in Moore, I guess was the other county at that particular time. And Orange County, we had one also. And we would hold meetings every Saturday. So if you had any problem you wanted to talk about, your congressman was there on a rotating basis. So that's basically what I did. And then, of course, I'd been up there 3 months, and I realized I wasn't going to run again.
Because they took away
They
Nash County.
gerrymandered me out. And that's when I decided, well, if we're going to go out, let's go out in a cloud of glory, and I'll run for governor. And I ran for governor in '68 and got 48% of the vote, and just enough to keep you in there. And I was going back and forth to Hardee's, working in politics.
Supporting your family.
And supporting our family, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank goodness for Hardee's. But that's kind of the story. And I was
And then
also.
lieutenant governor. When did you decide to run for lieutenant governor?
Golly, when was it? 67?
I've got it written down here.
No, 87.
89.
Yeah,
The
I
30th
ran, I think I
lieutenant
ran
governor.
in 87, got elected, and then served 88, 89, 90. No, I missed it. Served to 92. Yeah. And then ran for governor for the third time. And I think then I began to think, 3 strikes and you're out. I
But
think
getting
I've done.
48% of the vote, I mean, that's very encouraging
Yeah.
that you were right there.
And also the year before that, I'd been state Republican chairman. And at that time, the Republican Party was basically Charlotte and Western North Carolina. And I made the determination that we needed to move the headquarters to Raleigh, put it central in the state, put it where all the political activities were. And a lot of people in Charlotte didn't like that. And later, when I ran against Jim Holzhausen in '72, I lost the election in Charlotte. But that's the way it.
Well, we in Eastern North Carolina realize what's going on in Charlotte. I mean, they're almost a state among themselves.
Exactly.
unto
And they feel that
themselves.
very strongly.
Yeah.
Always have, I think.
Well, and let's then jump to when you recently were supporting Pat McCrory, and were very instrumental, I think, in helping him get eastern part of the state to support him.
Pat
talk about
was,
that.
I thought Pat was the best governor in my lifetime. What he accomplished, I was stunned when he didn't get reelected. I've known Roy Cooper, who's a nice guy, all my life, but I thought Pat was such an effective governor, and did such a great. He was the best campaigner I'd ever seen. He could walk into a Gardner's barbecue and he would meet and hug and see everybody in there. He got caught up in some things that he didn't really have a lot of control over, originating in Charlotte, and he, of course, lost by 10,000 votes. But
That bathroom bill was just
That-
so unnecessary.
But you know what really cost him the election? There was a toll road outside of Charlotte. And we went back after the election and looked at it. In the campaign that he won for governor, he carried those particular counties that the toll road was going to involve by like 13,000 votes. He lost them by 10,000 when he ran this time. He had supported the toll road, and the people up there didn't like it. And it kind of caught him. But he was a great governor, I thought. Yeah.
Let's talk about ABC Commission. Why was that something that you wanted to do? That was a lot of work. You could have just enjoyed going to the beach with Marie and enjoyed your grandchildren and whatnot, but I mean, you committed and you worked hard at that.
Yeah. That was a real surprise. I was on the group that was kind of deciding who was going to be involved in government with Pat, and I was going back and forth to Raleigh. I was outside of Nashville and the phone rang one morning about 7 o'clock. And it was Thomas Stith, who was going to be his chief of staff. And he said, the governor wants to speak to you. We were to leave the next day for a month in Mexico with my brother and his wife. We had gone every year up until then, and Pat said, I'd like for you to be chairman of the ABC Commission. And I said, Governor, I don't know anything about the ABC Commission. I don't even know where it is. He said, well, I don't either. So you can find out. Will you take it? He said, and I said, let me check with Marie and talk to her. I did, and she said, if that's something you want to do it. So I called him back up, and I said, now, when do you want me to start? He said, today. I said, we're supposed to leave for Mexico tomorrow. He said, I need you over there today. So we didn't go to Mexico.
Did you go without him, or you didn't go?
No, and once I got over there, most people don't understand what the ABC Commission or alcohol in North Carolina is. The state of North Carolina has a very unique system. And when I hear people say it needs to be privatized, they don't know what they're talking about. In the last 5 years that I was there, the ABC program in North Carolina put $1.5 billion into the state budget. That's how profitable it is.
Oh, yeah.
There's a warehouse in Raleigh right now beside the offices that has $60 million worth of liquor that the state of North Carolina doesn't own 1 cent of. It's all put in on consignment, and then it's shipped to each individual county who actually own the ABC operations, like Nash County. They send an order up there and it's shipped out. So really all the state does is ship the product, and they make a lot of money in doing it. And when I got there, I realized that there really wasn't much to do. I mean, it pretty well ran itself. But I started looking at some figures on underage drinking and having 9 grandchildren, and they were in all stages of high school and college at that time. I really started getting concerned, and the more we looked into it, the more we decided we need to do something.
And all the young people who died
Oh my Lord!
with drinking and driving.
Yeah, almost every day.
Yeah.
In fact, I think about the one that really I think had a great effect on me, and it was a young boy in Chapel Hill in summer school who had gone to Wilmington and started drinking, came back up to Chapel Hill, drank all that afternoon, went to 2 ABC permitted establishments in Chapel Hill, was served when he was intoxicated. At 2 o'clock that night, he gets on I-40 running the wrong way, hits a family coming home, and killed 3 people, one of them a little child. And we just said, we've got to do something. We had started the program at that time, but we really accelerated. So I went to the governor and said, I'd like to get some use some of our money at the ABC Commission to fund this program. And he said, well, if you think so, do it. We did it.
The tool, Jim, that you have given to parents is fabulous. I looked at it and immediately called my son, who's got an 11-year-old, and I said, you can't wait until he gets much older. I mean, middle school,
and he's
I think,
in California.
is almost in California.
Yeah.
And he said, you got it, Mom. But I think every parent, grandparent, anybody needs to show this to children, because it really does, it's very informative, but it also scares you. And I think it's healthy to be scared and to be more respectful. And now I'm hearing more and more about binge drinking.
I know.
So many kids in college or in high school are binge drinking, and that's poisonous to their system. I mean, that can kill them.
Well, it can have an effect on their brain. We did a research program with Duke Hospital and UNC Chapel Hill, and we found out that the brain really doesn't develop until you're about 25 years old. Kids start drinking at 11 and 12. And that was a startling thing. When I saw that, I said, that can't be true. And yet, the more we looked into it, we found out that that's when they're first exposed to it. We did 3 or 4 series of group interviews with young children, very professionally done out of a firm in Raleigh. And it was staggering to hear a little 11-year-old child say, oh, I know where we can get beer anytime we want to. And you're thinking, 11 years old. So it's something that we needed to do, and we got very good support, starting with the governor, thank goodness.
And currently, people can still, even though you're no longer the ABC with the ABC Commission, people can go to their website
Absolutely.
and watch it.
Yeah,
Talk it out.
When the new chairman came in, he called me up and he said, I wanted you to know we're going to continue the program. We're going to continue to fund it, and they're doing a terrific job.
Good.
They brought a couple of new people in, and they're really doing, they're doing some extraordinary things, I think.
I want to talk about Gardner's Barbecue and Gardner's because you were, for a while, you and Jerry started Gardner's, is
We
that
did,
right?
yes.
And what did that encompass?
Well, I'd always heard about Parker's Barbecue in Wilson, and we didn't. Melton's had basically gone under at that time because of all the flooding. So I went over one day and talked to the Parkers about opening one in Rocky Mount, and the original Gardner's was a Parker's. And we were going to open 2 or 3 different ones. After about 2 years, the Parkers said, you know, we really don't want to do this. Just, you know, change the name. So we changed the name to Gardner's. And it's been Gardner's since 1971.
How many locations are there?
There, at one time, there were 15.
Wow.
And we just had such a hard time getting managers to run them. As our leases ran out, we started trying to come back to Rocky Mount. So there's a main one on 301, and then we have one on out at
Westridge.
Yeah, at the shopping center where Alma's drugstore is, and then one across town. And then we do a big catering business. My nephews run them now. Jerry's 2 sons, Jay Gardner and Jamie Gardner. Jay lives in Rocky Mount, and Jamie lives in Wilmington. They also operate 12 Hardee's. So they've got the 3 Gardners and the catering and 12 Hardee's all in the eastern part of the state.
Well, I have to say we're so glad that y'all are from Rocky Mount, that you elected all these years to stay here and just bring honor to our community through so many
We're
of
so
your
glad
public
to
service.
have been part of it, really. And we were, again, very lucky to have grown up in Rocky Mount. And I think Rocky Mount is just on the cusp of really taking off again. The DMV moving here, the CSX moving here, the Chinese Tire Company moving here, Norris Tolson, and a lot of people in Rocky Mount have done a fabulous job in saying, we're not going to let Rocky Mount just go down the tube, like so much of eastern North Carolina. I serve on the Golden Leaf board right now.
Good.
And the Golden Leaf Foundation was created to replace tobacco in eastern North Carolina. So you have a chance firsthand to see what's happening. And Rocky Mount right now is doing as much or more than any other town in the eastern part of the state.
Wonderful.
So that's exciting.
It is, and thank you for the seeds y'all planted to help make a lot of that happen.
Well,
and
we were lucky to be here.
Well, we appreciate visiting with you. And
Thank you, Jean.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank
you.
you.